When we picture a global superpower collapsing, we usually imagine invading armies or massive, violent revolutions, right? But the truth is actually far quieter, and honestly, a lot more mathematical. Welcome to This Explainer, where today we're demystifying the true anatomy of empire financial death. As you'll see, empires don't actually die on the battlefield. They die on the balance sheet.
Think about this jarring paradox for a second. Let's look at Great Britain. Back in 1920, this was a nation that ruled a quarter of the world's land and a full fifth of its population. Yet somehow they lost it all in just 3 decades. So how exactly does the richest empire in human history, a nation that essentially built modern banking, end up totally humiliated and begging for international bailouts just a few years later?
Well, at its absolute peak, the British Empire covered 13.7 million square miles. That is just a staggering amount of physical territory. But here's the thing. Physical territory was really just a byproduct. Their true superpower was completely invisible. The real power was that the pound sterling was the undisputed global reserve currency. Every colony, every global trade route, every international bank, they all relied on British credit. Britain didn't just control the seas, they controlled the ledger.
And historically, empire financial death follows a pretty rigid 5-stage framework. It always starts with real productivity, manufacturing and trade. Then they expand. But eventually, they shift from actually making things to financialization, where wealth just comes from speculation and debt. Then comes the leverage addiction, borrowing basically just to maintain the illusion of strength. And finally, the math catches up, and you hit total collapse. So we're going to use this exact framework to trace Britain's tragic fall.
All right, let's dive into Stage 1, the World War I debt explosion. This is where 1914 completely transformed Britain's financial reality overnight.
Just look at how brilliantly this illustrates the invisible decay of the ledger. When the guns fired, Britain needed money faster than its empire could possibly extract it. In literally 4 years, we see an 11-fold debt explosion. They went from £650 million in debt to over $7.4 billion. To fund the trenches, Britain had to liquidate its foreign assets and, for the very first time, become a massive net debtor to the United States. Sure, they won the war militarily, but they completely lost their financial independence in the process.
Moving on to our second major milestone, the golden straitjacket mistake. Instead of accepting this harsh new economic reality, hubris completely took over.
Terrified of losing their status as the world's financial center to New York, the ruling elite desperately tried to turn back the clock. In 1925, Winston Churchill made the absolute catastrophic decision to peg the pound back to the gold standard at its old, pre-war rate. Because of heavy wartime inflation, doing this instantly overvalued the currency by about 10%. It was an act of pure vanity. Suddenly, British coal, steel, and textiles were incredibly expensive to foreign buyers, which made British exports entirely uncompetitive overnight.
Now, visionary economists like John Maynard Keynes saw this disaster coming from a mile away. He explicitly warned the government that this artificially strong pound acted as a hidden tax. To make up for this massive currency handicap, struggling industries like coal would be forced to brutally cut their workers' wages just to survive. But the government chose to save the prestige of their currency symbol over the actual livelihoods of their own citizens.
And well, Keynes hit the nail on the head. This arrogant policy locked the British economy in a golden straitjacket. When mine owners slashed pay and increased hours, it triggered the 1926 general strike. 1.7 million British workers walked out, completely paralyzing the nation. The policy created ghost towns, a solid decade of stagnation, and ultimately forced Britain to abandon gold entirely in utter humiliation by 1931.
Which brings us to Stage 3, Bretton Woods and bankruptcy. Just as the nation was finally catching its breath, World War II delivered the final, fatal blow.
To put this into perspective, by 1945, Britain was facing a staggering new reality. Their debt was 2.5 times larger than their entire economy, a 250% debt to GDP ratio. The shattered empire had liquidated absolutely everything of value. They were now completely dependent on American loans through the Lend-Lease program, literally just to feed their own people and keep the lights on.
So the financial torch was officially passed at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. The United States leveraged Britain's desperate bankruptcy to install the US dollar as the new global reserve currency. Because America held 3/4 of the world's gold, they got to make the rules. And make no mistake, this wasn't just some technical banking adjustment, it was the single most important transfer of geopolitical power in the 20th century.
Okay, now for the climax. In 1956, Section 4, Suez,
the financial execution. This is the exact moment the entire world realized the British emperor truly had no clothes.
Let's watch how this builds. During the 1956 Suez Crisis, Egypt nationalized a vital trade route. So Britain, alongside France and Israel, successfully invaded to take it back. Militarily, it was a flawless victory. British paratroopers were winning. But U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower was furious he hadn't been consulted. So what did he do? He bypassed the military entirely and directly attacked Britain's fragile balance sheet. He aggressively threatened to block Britain's IMF loans and just dump U.S. holdings of British government bonds on the open market.
Eisenhower didn't even need to fire a single missile. He essentially delivered a brutal reality check, telling them, you have no money and you have no gas, stop the war or your lights go out. This incredible financial blackmail, threatening to crash the pound and wipe out their economy by morning, forced an immediate and humiliating British surrender. The troops had to turn around and go home. It proved once and for all that military power is absolutely meaningless if you don't have financial sovereignty.
So, why does all this history about the British pound, or the Roman denarius before it, matter to your purchasing power today? Let's look at the final stage, the cycle of empire death.
Because when we hold a mirror up to the modern American economy, it is honestly a bit chilling. We see the U.S. checking off the exact same historical warning signs that destroyed previous superpowers. Massive war debts? Yes. Persistent trade deficits? Yes. Currency devaluation? Yes. And a heavy reliance on foreign creditors? Absolutely. The mechanics of collapse are identical here. Literally, only the flag has changed.
I mean, the modern math speaks for itself. We are currently staring at a $35 trillion national debt. The US dollar has lost over 86% of its purchasing power since it came off the gold standard in 1971. And perhaps most terrifyingly, the interest payments on the national debt now exceed the entire budget of the US military. The US is navigating the final dangerous stages of leverage, heavily reliant on foreign capital while increasingly weaponizing its reserve currency status, which is the exact behavior that accelerates a currency's demise. Since we've learned today that empires are never truly conquered until they first go broke, that the money always dies before the military does, I want to leave you with this fast-approaching question about the future of our global order. As the debt clock ticks higher and global trust fractures, how long will it be before the US dollar faces its own Suez moment? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this changes how you view the real balance of global power.